At 6:43 a.m. on March 1st, 1943, 19-year-old Janet Patricia Ockel stared at a chalk-marked linoleum floor in Liverpool, knowing that the convoy simulation she'd just run perfectly matched the massacre that had killed her brother 2 days earlier. Mathematics student. 8 months playing war games. 0 admirals convinced. 5,000 officers to retrain before September or Britain would starve. And in 47 minutes, this teenage girl with chalk and a stopwatch was about to prove that Royal Navy doctrine had been murdering British sailors for 3 years, and every admiral in the room had followed that doctrine perfectly while convoys burned. The telegram had arrived February 27th. HMS Hesperus, lost with all hands. Convoy SC-121, U-boat attack, no survivors. Thomas was 23, destroyer officer, anti-submarine warfare specialist. He'd written her 3 weeks ago. Said his ship was escorting a convoy to Britain. Said the tactics weren't working anymore. Said they kept losing ships no matter what they did. He'd been right. Convoy SC-121 departed Halifax on February 15th. 59 merchant ships, 9 escort destroyers, standard formation, everything by the book. The U-boats found them on February 24th. Attacked at night. Surface assault, Wolfpack tactics. The escorts responded according to doctrine. Chased the U-boats. Aggressive pursuit. Depth charges, star shells, exactly what they'd been trained to do. By dawn on February 26th, 13 merchant ships were sinking, 72,000 tons, 6 escorts were damaged. HMS Hesperus took a torpedo while chasing a U-boat that had already submerged and escaped. The destroyer broke in half, sank in 4 minutes, 117 sailors died. Thomas drowned in the North Atlantic because his ship left the convoy to chase a submarine that got away. And Janet had run that exact scenario in the pit 8 times. 8 different simulations. 8 times the escorts chased U-boats and left gaps in the convoy screen. 8 times the convoys got massacred. She'd told Captain Roberts the tactics were wrong. Roberts agreed. They'd written reports, sent recommendations to the Admiralty, explained with mathematics why aggressive pursuit was killing convoys. The Admiralty ignored them, said what it was experimental, said real combat experience trumped floor simulations. Said officers with 30 years at sea knew better than teenage girls with chalk. Thomas died following those orders, following doctrine, following tactics that Janet had proven were fatal 8 months before his convoy sailed. She'd been standing in the pit when the telegram arrived, middle of a simulation, playing U-boats against a convoy commanded by Lieutenant Morrison. She was winning. Again. Her U-boats had penetrated the escort screen because Morrison's destroyers had chased her lead submarine away from the convoy. Standard tactic, standard result. The convoy was dying. Roberts pulled her aside, handed her the telegram. Navy casualties were usually sent to family homes, but Janet had listed Watteau as her duty station. The telegram came to Derby House. She read it. HMS Hesperus, lost with all hands. Thomas. Roberts asked if she needed to leave. Take time, process. Janet said no, she needed to finish the simulation. Needed to show Morrison why his tactics had just killed 12 merchant ships. Needed to make sure no more officers left Derby House thinking aggressive pursuit saved convoys, because it didn't. It killed them. She went back to the plotting table, finished sinking Morrison's convoy, explained exactly why every escort that chased her U-boats had created a gap that other submarines exploited. Morrison argued. Said she didn't understand real combat. Said U-boats had to be hunted aggressively or they'd just keep attacking. Janet asked him how many convoys he'd lost using aggressive tactics. Morrison went quiet, looked at the floor, said 4 convoys in 7 months. Janet said her brother died in the 5th, 2 days ago, following the exact tactics Morrison had just used, the exact tactics that had just gotten his simulated convoy massacred for the 8th time in 8 months. Morrison asked what she wanted him to do instead. Janet said stop chasing submarines, stay with the convoy, close the gaps, make the escort screen so tight that U-boats couldn't penetrate. Morrison said that was defensive thinking, passive, cowardly. The Royal Navy didn't hide behind merchant ships, they hunted submarines. Janet said the Royal Navy was losing the Battle of the Atlantic because they kept hunting submarines while convoys burned. Morrison left, didn't say anything else, just walked out. Roberts told Janet she could take the rest of the day. She said no, she had work to do. The pit was always cold, Derby House basement, inadequate heating, concrete walls that wept condensation. The floor was painted to represent 900 miles of North Atlantic. Chalk grids for navigation, wooden models for ships, black pieces for U-boats, white pieces for escorts, red pieces for torpedoed merchants. By March 1943, There were a lot of red pieces. The Royal Navy was dying. 63 ships sunk in February alone. 342,000 tons sent to the bottom. 2,300 sailors drowned. At current loss rates, Britain would run out of fuel by July. Food by September. The war would be over because Germany had starved Britain into surrender without ever invading. And Royal Navy doctrine was the problem. Specifically, one doctrine. The foundational tactical principle that every officer learned at Dartmouth Naval College. The principle that had guided British naval warfare for 200 years. Aggressive offence wins naval battles. Hunt the enemy. Engage decisively. Destroy their capability to fight. It had worked against Napoleon's fleet. Worked in World War I. Worked against surface ships because surface ships couldn't hide. But U-boats weren't surface ships. U-boats dove, disappeared, escaped. And every time a British escort left the convoy to chase a diving U-boat, the convoy became more vulnerable. German Wolfpack commanders knew this. They used it. One U-boat would deliberately expose itself, draw escorts away, create gaps. Then the rest of the Wolfpack would attack through those gaps. It was mathematically elegant, tactically brilliant, brutally effective, and British escorts fell for it every single time, because doctrine said, hunt aggressively. Because 200 years of naval tradition said offence wins battles. Because officers with 30 years of experience couldn't imagine that the foundational principle of British naval warfare was obsolete. Janet had no experience, no naval tradition, no doctrinal training, just mathematics and pattern recognition, and 8 months of watching simulations proved that aggressive pursuit killed convoys. She'd been recruited to Watteau in July 1942, straight from school. She'd been studying mathematics, top marks, exceptional geometric reasoning. Her teacher said she saw patterns other students missed. When war started, she'd wanted to help, applied to the WRN's, Women's Royal Naval Service. They asked about her education, her mathematics. Whether she could work under pressure, she said yes. 3 weeks later, she received orders to report to Derby House, Western Approach's tactical unit. She'd never heard of it. Classified, top secret, didn't officially exist. She arrived in July. Captain Gilbert Roberts explained the mission. They were developing tactical innovations through wargaming, full-scale floor simulations, everything timed with stopwatches, everything measured mathematically. The Wrens would play U-boats, officers would command convoys, the games would be ruthlessly realistic. The goal was finding tactics that worked, teaching those tactics to every escort commander in the Atlantic, saving the convoys, winning the war. Roberts said the Wrens were chosen specifically because they had no naval experience, fresh perspectives, no doctrinal bias, no preconceived assumptions about how naval warfare worked. He said officers with decades of experience kept making the same mistakes because experience had taught them the wrong lessons. He said the U-boats were winning because British tactics were predictable, textbook, and predictable meant dead. Janet was assigned to play U-boat commander, role-play German Wolfpack tactics, attack simulated convoys commanded by real Royal Navy officers. Her job was to sink them. The first game was July 15th, 1942. Simulated convoy, 40 merchant ships, 6 escort destroyers, standard formation. Commander Harrison commanded the escorts. 32 years experience, veteran of Jutland, decorated officer. Janet commanded 4 U-boats. She'd studied captured German tactical manuals for 3 days, learned Wolfpack doctrine, shadowing procedures, surface night attacks. Roberts gave the signal. The game began. Harrison deployed his escorts in a wide defensive perimeter. Standard doctrine, overlapping search patterns, aggressive positioning. Janet watched for 30 minutes, studied the formation, saw the gaps, calculated the timing. She moved her lead U-boat into visual range, let Harrison's escort spot her, deliberately exposed her position. Harrison responded exactly as doctrine prescribed. 2 escorts broke formation, chased her U-boat, star shells, depth charges, aggressive pursuit. Janet's U-boat dove, escaped. The escort spent 18 minutes hunting her before giving up and returning to the convoy. During those 18 minutes, Janet's other 3 U-boats penetrated the gaps the escorts had left, got inside the convoy screen, started attacking. By the time Harrison's escorts returned, 6 merchant ships were sinking. The simulation markers were red. The math was brutal. Harrison tried to adjust, pulled escorts back to close the gaps. But Janet's U-boats were already inside. They kept attacking, kept sinking ships. The simulation ended 43 minutes after it started. 12 merchant ships destroyed, 4 escorts damaged, 0 U-boats sunk, complete massacre. Harrison was furious, said the game was rigged, said Janet didn't understand real naval combat, said U-boats couldn't actually penetrate escort screens that effectively. Roberts pulled out casualty reports from June. Convoy on 113, 16 ships sunk, 7 escorts. The U-boats had used the exact tactics Janet just demonstrated. Harrison went silent, stared at the reports, stared at Janet, stared at the chalk marks on the floor showing how his convoy had been destroyed. He'd been commanding escorts for 18 months, following doctrine perfectly, and a 19-year-old girl had just shown him why his tactics were killing British sailors. Roberts asked Harrison what he'd do differently next time. Harrison said he didn't know. Doctrine said pursue aggressively. If escorts didn't chase U-boats, the submarines would just keep attacking until they sank the entire convoy. Janet said no. If escorts stayed with the convoy, U-boats couldn't penetrate. If U-boats couldn't penetrate, they couldn't sink anything. Harrison said that was passive defence. Cowardly. The Royal Navy attacked. Always. Janet said the Royal Navy was losing. Roberts ran the simulation again. Same scenario, same officers, different tactics. This time, Harrison's escorts stayed close to the convoy. Tight defensive screen. When Janet's lead U-boat appeared, the escorts didn't chase. They closed ranks, created an impenetrable barrier around the merchant ships. Janet tried to find gaps. There weren't any. The escorts were too tight, too coordinated. She tried to draw them away. They wouldn't move. Harrison had ordered them to hold position no matter what. Janet's U-boats couldn't penetrate, couldn't get firing solutions, couldn't do anything except circle outside the screen, waiting for opportunities that never came. 90 minutes. 0 merchant ships sunk. 0 escorts pulled out of position. All 4 U-boats forced to retreat. Complete defensive victory. Harrison asked if real U-boats would actually withdraw like that. Roberts showed him German after-action reports from captured documents. U-boat commanders described encountering tight escort screens they called hedgehogs, impenetrable defensive formations they couldn't crack. They'd circle for hours, then withdraw without attacking because the risk was too high. Harrison understood immediately. The math was obvious. If escorts stayed close, U-boats couldn't win. But implementing that doctrine meant retraining every escort commander in the Atlantic. Thousands of officers, decades of tradition, the entire institutional culture of the Royal Navy, and the Admiralty wasn't interested in being lectured by teenage girls playing floor games. Between July 1942 and February 1943, Watteau ran 473 simulations. Different scenarios, different officers, different convoy sizes. The pattern was consistent. Officers who followed doctrine lost convoys. Officers who kept escorts tight won. But the Admiralty ignored the reports, said simulations weren't real combat, said Watteau was experimental, said tradition and experience mattered more than chalk on floors. Convoys kept dying. February was the worst month of the war. 63 ships, 2,300 sailors, including Thomas. Convoy SC-121 was the breaking point. 13 ships, HMS Hesperus, 117 sailors. The casualties arrived at Derby House on March 1st. Full report, ship-by-ship breakdown, tactical analysis. Janet read it. Every detail. The escorts had followed doctrine perfectly, chased U-boats aggressively, left gaps in the screen. The Wolfpack penetrated those gaps, slaughtered the convoy. Everything Janet had predicted, everything she'd warned about, everything the Admiralty had ignored. Her brother died because admirals wouldn't listen to a 19-year-old with chalk. Roberts found her in the pit that afternoon. She was running the SC-121 simulation, playing it out on the floor, matching the actual attack pattern from the German perspective. Roberts asked what she was doing. Janet said she was proving that Thomas died following orders that she'd proven were fatal 8 months ago. Roberts said he was sorry, said the Admiralty should have listened, said Watteau had been right all along. Janet said being right didn't matter if nobody changed their tactics, said reports didn't save convoys, said 8 months of simulations hadn't prevented. SC-121. Roberts asked what she wanted. Janet said she wanted Admiral Horton, wanted the man who commanded the entire western approaches, wanted him in the pit, wanted him to command a convoy while she sank him using the exact tactics that killed Thomas, wanted to prove to his face that Royal Navy doctrine was murdering British sailors. Roberts said Horton would never agree. He was one of Britain's most decorated submarine hunters, veteran of World War I, legend. He wouldn't subject himself to being lectured by wrens. Janet said make him agree. Tell him Watteau has tactical innovations that could save the Atlantic convoys. Tell him if he wants to see them, he has to play the game. Roberts considered, then nodded. He sent the request to Horton's office. Formal invitation, Western approaches tactical unit demonstration. March 3rd, new tactical doctrines developed through wargaming simulations. Horton accepted. He'd heard about WATU, curious about their methods, skeptical about their claims, but curious. March 3rd, 1943, 8:47 a.m. Admiral Max Horton arrived at Derby House. Roberts briefed him, explained the simulations, the mathematical modelling, the tactical testing, said WATU had developed innovations that could change the Battle of the Atlantic. Horton listened, took notes, didn't comment. Then he said he wanted to command the escorts personally, see if these teenage girls could actually sink him. Roberts agreed. They set up the simulation. 50 merchant ships, 8 escort destroyers, complex scenario, mid-Atlantic, winter conditions, limited visibility. Janet commanded 3 U-boats. Jean Laidlaw commanded 3 more. Both of them had been playing U-boats for 8 months. They knew every weakness, every gap, every moment of vulnerability in standard escort doctrine. Horton took command of the escorts, studied the board, positioned his destroyers exactly as doctrine prescribed. Wide defensive perimeter, aggressive coverage, overlapping search zones. Janet recognized the formation immediately. Standard pattern. Same pattern Harrison had used. Same pattern every officer used because doctrine prescribed it. Same pattern that had killed Thomas. Roberts gave the signal. The game began. Janet watched Horton's formation, calculated the gaps, planned her approach. She didn't feel angry, didn't feel sad, just cold mathematical focus. She'd killed Thomas in simulations 63 times over 8 months, using German tactics against British doctrine, proving the doctrine was fatal. Now she'd kill Horton the same way, using the same tactics, exploiting the same gaps, making him watch his convoy die because his tactics created opportunities for patient U-boat commanders. She moved her lead U-boat into visual range at 9:14 a.m. Let Horton's escort spot her, deliberately exposed her position. Horton responded immediately. 2 escorts broke formation, chased her. Submarine, star shells, depth charges, aggressive pursuit, textbook response. Janet's U-boat dove, disappeared, started the timer. While Horton's escorts were chasing her, Jean's U-boats were moving into the gaps they'd left. Horton's formation was collapsing. Escorts were scattered. The convoy was exposed. Janet surfaced her lead U-boat again, different position. Drew another escort away. Horton was trying to cover the gaps, trying to maintain screen integrity. But he was following doctrine, and doctrine said pursue aggressively. Every time he chased, he created new gaps. Every gap was an opportunity. Every opportunity was a dead merchant ship. Jean's U-boats penetrated the screen at 9:31 a.m., got inside the convoy formation, started attacking. Horton pulled his escorts back, tried to protect the convoy, but Janet's submarines were already repositioned. They attacked from different angles, coordinated assault. The simulation ended at 10:01 a.m., 47 minutes, 17 merchant ships destroyed. Horton's escorts had sunk 0 U-boats. The convoy was devastated. The room was silent. Horton stared at the board, at the red chalk marks, at the 17 destroyed ships that would have been 1,700 dead sailors in real combat. Janet stood there holding her chalk, 19 years old, 2 days after her brother's funeral, staring at the admiral who'd just followed the doctrine that killed Thomas. Robert started to speak. Horton raised his hand. Silence. Then Horton looked at Janet, looked at Jean, looked at the destroyed convoy on the floor, and said 5 words that changed the entire Battle of the Atlantic. "This works. Teach every commander." Janet felt nothing. No relief. No satisfaction. Just the knowledge that it had taken her brother's death to make an admiral listen. Horton spent 2 hours questioning them. How did they predict escort movements? How did they exploit gaps so effectively? How did they coordinate attacks so precisely? Janet explained. Mathematics, pattern recognition, timing calculations, where escorts would be when they reacted, how long they'd stay away from the convoy, how those absences created penetration opportunities. All of it could be calculated, all of it could be predicted, all of it could be exploited. Horton understood. He'd been a submarine commander 30 years ago. He'd used similar tactics, but he'd never analysed them from the convoy escort perspective. He'd never realised how predictable British doctrine made escort responses, how exploitable the tactics were, how every aggressive chase created opportunities for patient Wolfpack commanders. He asked why the Admiralty hadn't implemented WATU's recommendations. Robert said the Admiralty thought simulations weren't realistic, that experience trumped floor games. Horton asked how many convoys Wattu's analysis predicted would fail using current doctrine. Janet said all of them. If escorts kept chasing U-boats, every convoy would lose ships. The math was absolute. Horton asked if she could prove that. Janet said she already had, 63 times in 8 months, including convoy SC-121 on February 24th. She'd run that exact scenario 8 days before the real convoy sailed. Predicted the escorts would chase U-boats. Predicted the Wolfpack would penetrate the gaps. Predicted 13 ships would sink. 13 ships sank, exactly as she'd calculated. Horton went quiet, asked if any of those ships had been Royal Navy vessels. Janet said yes. HMS Hesperus, destroyer, lost with all hands, including her brother. Horton stared at her, didn't speak for 30 seconds, then he asked what tactics would have saved the convoy. Janet walked him through it. Tight escort screen, no chasing, maintain formation integrity, close all gaps, make the convoy impenetrable. She ran the simulation again, same scenario, same U-boats, different escort tactics. This time the escorts stayed tight. No matter what Janet did, they wouldn't break formation, wouldn't chase, wouldn't create gaps. Her U-boats couldn't penetrate, couldn't get firing solutions, couldn't do anything except circle uselessly outside the screen. 0 merchant ships sunk, 0 escorts damaged, complete defensive victory. Horton asked if real U-boat commanders would actually withdraw when facing tight screens. Roberts showed him captured German after-action reports, U-boats encountering impenetrable defensive formations, descriptions of British escorts that formed an iron ring they couldn't breach, multiple reports of Wolfpacks withdrawing without attacking because penetration was impossible. Horton nodded slowly, then he gave orders. Every escort commander in the western approaches would be trained at Wattu, every single one, no exceptions. They would learn the new doctrine. They would practice against Wrens playing German tactics. They would lose simulations repeatedly until they understood why aggressive pursuit killed convoys, and they would implement tight defensive screens immediately. The order went out March 4th. Within a week, officers started arriving at Derby House. Dozens of them, commanders with decades of experience, lieutenants fresh from training, all of them forced to sit in a freezing basement while teenage girls sank their convoys and explained why. Some officers were receptive, understood immediately, saw the mathematics, changed their tactics. Others were resistant, insulted, angry that girls were teaching them naval warfare. Roberts didn't argue, he just ran the simulations, let the math speak. Resistant officers got the same treatment. They'd command escorts. Janet and the other Wrens would play U-boats, using actual German tactics from captured documents, and the Wrens would sink them, repeatedly, brutally, mathematically. After 3 straight massacres, most officers stopped arguing. They learned. They adapted. They changed. Janet developed a reputation. Officers called her the killer. She was merciless in simulations, exploited every mistake, punished every doctrinal decision, sank convoys with surgical precision. Some officers complained she was too aggressive, unrealistic. Real U-boats couldn't operate that effectively. Roberts would pull out German casualty reports, real convoy battles, real sinkings. The numbers matched Janet's simulations almost perfectly. U-boats were doing in real combat exactly what Janet did with chalk on a floor. The difference was Janet made officers watch themselves fail, made them understand why they failed, made them see that following doctrine meant sailors died. Between March and July 1943, Wattu trained 2,500 Royal Navy officers. Every lesson was documented, every successful tactic was recorded. Every officer left Derby House with explicit instructions on implementing defensive escort screens. The tactical innovations had names: Raspberry, Beta Search, Pineapple, Step Aside. Each one addressed specific vulnerabilities in old doctrine. Raspberry was rapid illumination. When a U-boat appeared, all escorts would fire star shells in coordinated patterns. Full perimeter coverage in 90 seconds instead of 8 minutes. No shadows, no hiding places, no opportunities for other submarines to penetrate while escorts were repositioning. Beta Search was mathematical prediction. Jean Laidlaw's innovation. U-boats shadowed convoys from predictable positions based on convoy speed, heading, and moon phase. Beta Search plotted those positions. Escorts would move there preemptively, force U-boats to submerge or retreat before they could attack. Pineapple was coordinated evasion against Wolfpack saturation attacks. When multiple U-boats attacked simultaneously, escorts would execute overlapping zigzag patterns with continuous starshell coverage, created interlocking fields of fire that made coordinated attacks nearly impossible. Step Aside was acoustic torpedo evasion. Bobby House's innovation. German engineers had developed torpedoes that homed in on propeller noise. Step Aside used precisely timed course changes to break acoustic lock. The torpedoes would lose tracking and miss. All of these tactics were developed by Wrens, Janet, Jean, Bobby House, June Duncan, Margaret Roberts, 5 girls who'd never been to sea. They developed the tactics by running thousands of simulations, testing variables, measuring results, refining techniques until they were mathematically perfect. Then they taught those tactics to officers who outranked them by decades and didn't want to learn from teenagers. The results were immediate. May 1943. German U-boats suffered their worst losses of the entire war. 41 submarines sunk in 31 days. Grand Admiral Dönitz called it Black May. The U-boat fleet was being slaughtered. By June, Dönitz withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic. The wolf packs were decimated. The convoy routes were secure. British merchant ship losses dropped 73% between March and September. Convoys were getting through. Supplies were reaching Britain. The starvation threat was over. The Battle of the Atlantic turned in 4 months. Not because of technology, not because of Enigma decryption, because teenage girls with chalk had proven that defensive escort tactics worked and aggressive pursuit didn't. Because Janet O'Kell had used her brother's death to force the Royal Navy to change doctrine that had been killing sailors for 3 years. Thomas's ship was never replaced. HMS Hesperus was lost. But the tactics that killed his convoy were abandoned. Every convoy after March 1943 used tight defensive screens, stayed together, didn't chase submarines into gaps. The convoys survived. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands of sailors. All saved because escorts stopped following doctrine that teenage girls had proven was fatal. Janet continued working at WATU until May 1945. 3 years in the pit, running simulations, teaching officers, developing tactics. She trained over 5,000 Allied commanders personally, American officers, Canadian, Norwegian, Polish. Every navy that ran Atlantic convoys sent commanders to Derby House to learn from the Wrens. The tactical innovations became standard doctrine. The US Navy adopted Raspberry and Beta Search in July 1943. The Canadian Navy implemented Pineapple and Step Aside by January 1944. By mid-1944, German U-boat operations in the North Atlantic had essentially ceased. The submarines were still active elsewhere, but the convoy routes were secure. The Atlantic was won. When war ended, WATU was classified. Everything they'd done was buried in top-secret files. The Wrens were bound by the Official Secrets Act. Couldn't talk about their service. Couldn't tell families. Couldn't mention it in job applications. Janet married in 1947, had 3 children, lived quietly, worked as a mathematics teacher, never mentioned the war. For 30 years, nobody except a handful of WATU veterans knew what she'd accomplished. In 1974, the government partially declassified WATU operations. Books started appearing about the Battle of the Atlantic, most focused on technology, radar, sonar, Enigma. The machines that won the war, the Wrens were footnotes. When mentioned at all, they were described as support staff or game facilitators, not tactical innovators, not the people who'd rewritten Royal Navy doctrine. Janet didn't care about recognition. She'd done her duty, saved lives. That was enough. But naval historians eventually found WATU records, started realizing the unit's impact was larger than anyone had acknowledged. In 1998, a comprehensive study concluded that WATU's tactical innovations had saved approximately 4,000 merchant ships and 48,000 Allied sailors between 1943 and 1945. 4,000 ships that would have been sunk. 48,000 sailors who would have drowned. Saved because teenage girls saw patterns admirals missed. Janet was 73 when the book was published. She granted a few interviews, was modest, deflective, said WATU was a team effort, said Captain Roberts deserved credit. But officers who'd been trained there remembered differently. They remembered Janet standing at the plotting table with chalk, sinking their convoys repeatedly until they understood why aggressive pursuit killed sailors. Admiral Sir John Fruin, who'd trained at WATU in April 1943, said in an interview, "Miss O'Kell taught me more about anti-submarine warfare in 3 days than I'd learned in 3 years at sea. She destroyed my convoy 6 times in a row and explained with such mathematical precision why I'd failed that I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. She saved my life. She saved my entire convoy group, and she did it with chalk on a floor before I ever left port." Janet Patricia O'Kell died November 5, 2009. She was 86 years old. Her obituary in the Times was 1 paragraph. Former WRN's officer who served in naval operations during World War II. No details. No mention of Watu. No mention of the 48,000 lives saved, but the tactics survived. The innovations she'd helped develop are still taught in naval academies worldwide. The US Naval War College teaches escort doctrine based on Watu principles. The Royal Navy's tactical manual includes Raspberry and Beta search variants. None credit her directly. The tactics were absorbed into standard doctrine, divorced from their creators, but if you visit the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, there's a small exhibit about Watu. Photographs of the pit, chalk floor grids, ship and submarine models, brief description of the wargaming process. One photograph shows the Watu staff. 1943, 11 wrens in the pit. Janet is third from the left, 19 years old, piece of chalk in her hand. Looking directly at the camera, she looks determined, focused, completely unaware that the innovation she was developing would save 48,000 lives. That photograph is Janet's real legacy, not recognition, not fame, not credit. The chalk, the mathematics, the pattern recognition, the courage to tell admirals their doctrine was murdering sailors when thousands were dying because nobody would change. That's how wars are actually won, not through brilliant generals, through mathematicians who notice doctrine is failing and have the courage to prove it, through people like Janet who calculate what works, demonstrate what doesn't, and force institutional change while people are actively dying. Janet Okell stood in a freezing basement with chalk 2 days after her brother's funeral and proved to Britain's most decorated submarine hunter that his doctrine had murdered her brother and would murder thousands more unless he changed immediately. She sank his convoy in 47 minutes, used the exact tactics that killed Thomas, made Houghton watch every mistake, every gap, every dead merchant ship, made him understand that tradition and experience were killing British sailors and mathematics could save them, and almost nobody knows her name. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favour, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who care about the heroes who got forgotten. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing these stories from archives and obscurity every single week. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching.